Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. We're going to continue our conversation about the factors that drive entrepreneurial behavior and then give you an opportunity to explore some of your own abilities with relation to becoming an entrepreneur. So prior experiences also tend to drive entrepreneurial behavior. Interestingly, students often suspect that management or corporate experience is likely to prevent you from being an entrepreneur. But in fact, the research shows that people who've had work experience, including management and corporate experience, are actually more likely to become entrepreneurs over time. This is interesting because many students contact me during the semester or afterwards to say that they would like to look at entrepreneurial opportunities and where do I suggest they find them. And my response is often along two lines. One, if there's something you immediately want to pursue, then pursue it. But two, if you don't have something you immediately want to pursue, then perhaps it would be a good idea to get, a more normal job, working for another company for a brief period of time or longer. It's great for your resume. It gives you direct experience with corporations and organizations. It helps you build a network. Might help you save a little bit of money so that you can actually either invest that in your own business or at least continue to pay rent when you decide you want to start up your own company. I think that those can be incredibly valuable. So it's good to recognize that just because you choose to go down a more traditional job path doesn't prevent you from becoming an entrepreneur later on in your career. There are some other factors that are worth noting. Age actually does matter. So if we notice that many startup entrepreneurs are relatively young, although the majority of them are in fact in their 30s and 40s, but which kind of goes against some of what you see in the popular media, especially because some of the biggest, most successful entrepreneurs have been very young when they created their tech companies. People like Mark Zuckerberg, obviously, Elon Musk, and so on. But that's not the reality for most entrepreneurs. Those are exceptions. And there's another really interesting factor to consider. This shows you the age when they founded high-growth startups, but we note an even stronger impact on the likelihood of success based on age. In fact, the older the entrepreneur is, for quite a while, the more likely they are to be successful right up until around age 65 or so. Why is that? Well, I suspect it's because these people have a network in place, they have corporate or management experience already, or they've been an entrepreneur before. So it's really important to remember that just because you don't start a venture in your teens or your 20s, that doesn't prevent you from eventually becoming an entrepreneur, much less becoming a successful entrepreneur. The statistics suggest you actually might be more likely to succeed if you wait a little bit longer. So what about students, though? Have you ever been involved in a startup? Do you know someone who has? Take a moment now to continue in the Canvas activity and answer the questions with regard to your own either experiences or the experiences you've observed in others. When you've done that, then so this would be a good time just to pause this audio presentation, and then when you've completed that piece of the Canvas activity, please then continue. What are some of the pros and cons of a student startup? Well, right now you probably have a lot of energy. You're probably poor, which means you have relatively little to lose. You're very flexible. You might feel like your schedule is very full, but in fact the odds are good that your schedule is quite flexible. You have immediate access to colleagues who could potentially be co-founders or employees. And as some of the readings point out, you're a little bit on the ignorant side. And we don't mean that in a bad way. What we mean is that you don't really understand the risks that you're taking. You don't really understand how hard this is going to be, how frustrating, how emotionally intense. And those are probably good things. Many entrepreneurs joke that if they knew what they were going to get themselves into, they would have never done it. And yet, oddly enough, if you then ask them if they're going to do it again, they usually say yes. So there's sort of a little bit of an aspect of addiction here. Like if you knew how difficult and horrible it would be, you might not do it, but once you've done it, you sort of can't stop. There are some clear cons to starting a venture when you're a student, you really don't have that much market knowledge. You probably don't have that much access to capital. And as one of the articles that you've read points out, you're less dedicated because you're a student. You can simply bail out at any time. Now, that might seem like a good thing to you, but it's probably not a good thing for your venture, because it might be that you're prepared to bail out, even though the venture has good potential, just because you've hit a temporary hurdle. So some students do ask me, I have this fantastic idea, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Should I, bail on my classes and really launch this company? And there's, multiple sides to this story. You'll hear a lot of entrepreneurs in the videos in this course and elsewhere say you have to follow your passion. If it's something you really want to do, then don't let anything get in your way. Look at Bill Gates, Michael Dell, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, all these people who dropped out of college in order to form these multi-billion-dollar companies. On the other hand, I think most of us who've been through the process and work directly with students generally tend to say no. Yes, it's good to follow your passion, but you also have a responsibility towards yourself and your family. And keep in mind that for every person like Bill Gates who dropped out of college to build a multi-billion-dollar company, there are thousands or tens of thousands of people who tried to do something similar and failed. And it's just that you don't hear about them, right? Because they don't make for exciting news on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It's not generally a good idea to model yourself on an outlier. If you really do totally believe it, hey, maybe you have to consider it. But statistically speaking, most of us in this field believe that the students are best served by continuing and completing their education. Some of the factors you might consider based on interviews that we've done with students and with parents, probably your default answer is no, you should not drop out. Don't drop out. Do finish your degree. Recognize that there is a potential downside. There could be a financial impact on you, and that if you are going to do it, make sure you have a fail-fast mentality. That is, how much time you can really invest into it before it's time to give up and maybe return to school. Recognize that this may be an issue of personal commitment. Is it really that you believe that this idea is really great, or maybe is it sometimes that you're just not quite as happy in school as you might be? You might remember from the prior presentation that sometimes great entrepreneurs don't have a really good GPA history, and I have dealt with students who have felt like they just didn't belong in university, and their GPA wasn't very good, and they thought maybe being an entrepreneur was a better option. And it might be, but we really encourage students to recognize that that opportunity will probably still be out there. But coming back to school later on is really, really difficult. Maybe you can get the startup launched while you're finishing your degree. Many students start companies while they're still doing their school. Make sure that you've done some early confirmation. This course can be incredibly helpful for you to really think through whether or not there's an opportunity. Try to talk to potential investors who really understand the field, not friends or family, right? Don't go to friends and family because they're going to give you a more emotional and personally biased perspective on it, or potential paying customers. Find out whether talk to them about whether they think your idea really has legs or not. Set some deadlines with milestones, and then, if things just don't work out, be ready to come back to school and make it work. A big aspect of being entrepreneurial is finding some level of balance. We mentioned previously that two traits of entrepreneurs are self-esteem and optimism. That can get you in trouble. If you think you're infallible and you are totally optimistic about the future, it means that you won't recognize it when it's not working. It's essential that you validate your idea with customer market feedback. If you go to customers and they say they don't like what you're doing, you need to be prepared for the possibility that maybe they're right. The best entrepreneurs are both determined, they're passionate and believe in themselves, but they're quite willing to be wrong. And when they realize they're wrong, they recognize that something has to change. So this is one of my favorite quotes about being an entrepreneur. If you're the CEO of a tech startup and you're sleeping through the night, you're doing it wrong. My own experience as the co-founder of of a couple of different biotech companies really reinforces this. It is quite tough to launch one of these companies and not feel stressed a lot. There was a professor at UW-Madison named Bob Pricer who actually was one of the professors when I was doing my MBA, and he once said that when you become an entrepreneur, your business is the last thing you think of before you go to sleep at night, and it's the first thing that you think of when you wake up in the morning, and it's the reason that you wake up in the middle of the night with the cold sweats. Being an entrepreneur can be a challenge, and being in a high-speed field with lots of competition, lots of change can be incredibly stressful. So what I'd like you to do now is complete the rest of the Canvas activity. There's a couple more questions that it asks you to go through. So this is going to be a good time to pause. And then I have one last thing as part of that activity that I'll be asking you to do here. You're going to do a self-assessment of entrepreneurial traits. The links are here in the slide deck, as well as, I believe, in the Canvas activity. It's a series of questions. It won't take you too long. It will take a good 10 minutes or so. I think you could go faster or slower depending on how thorough you want to be. There's no written answers. It's all just numerical scales. But it will then give you an assessment of a comparison against the broader population on 3 characteristics. And what I would really like you to do is to help build out this course profile. So students prior to you have taken this evaluation, and I would be so grateful if you would enter your results into the scoring system. You just enter the numbers in, and then it will give you an opportunity to see how you compare to other students in the course. Right here, you can click on this link. Obviously, it would be great if you did the assessment first. Not that you'll be able to figure it out necessarily, but if you do the assessment first and then check your scores, enter them into the system, and then come back and take a look at the profiles. You can see how your scores compare to the other students who have taken MHR 322 in the past or who are taking it right now. And that's not to say that if your scores are higher than other students, that means you're destined to be an entrepreneur. And it doesn't mean that if your scores are lower than other students, then it's impossible for you to be an entrepreneur. It's simply a way of gauging how you compare. And you might want to think about what the implications would be if your scores are higher, what that suggests about you. And if your scores are lower, how could you address that if you wanted to be an entrepreneur? What kind of team could you put together? And towards that end, I've provided a link here to an article from CEO Magazine, which is about as far from entrepreneurship as you get, because this is targeted at the CEOs of large established organizations. But the key point that you can use an entrepreneurial mindset anywhere, whether you're in the corporate environment, at a startup company, at a government, in an educational system, a not-for-profit. You can take the tools and skills that we're going to work on throughout this class in order to improve those organizations, to find opportunities, and to take action to make those changes real. So I hope that this has helped you think further about your own interest in entrepreneurship, some of the elements that drive people to be entrepreneurs, and the opportunities that are out there regardless of what type of career you might consider.